So in your book, Disrupted, right? So you talk about three phases of leading through uncertainty. So I think we are probably in the era when it comes to leading under conditions of uncertainty today, because because of all the different reasons, pandemic, and supply chain disruptions, and workplace disruptions, and working from home, working from office, working hybrid. There is just enormous amount of uncertainty today. And you talk about an interesting model around how to lead in such an environment. Can you just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, and I wrote that book during the pandemic to help leaders lead through the time where we went through this major, not just uncertainty, but we went through a major disruption. We went through a major crisis. And it's almost like for the first time for most people that they'd been through, like the whole world had been through something like this. So the three phases are crisis, recovery, and growth. And leaders have to operate differently in each of those phases. So if you think about it like a boat in a storm, and I also remember, Mukesh, I don't know, I'm sure you've heard people say this at the time. You heard people say, we're all in the same boat. Okay, it's actually not true. During the pandemic, we were all in the same storm, but different people had different boats to navigate through that storm. But you can imagine a boat that was caught in the storm and the boat was sinking. And then what do you do? As a leader, when the boat's sinking, the number one priority, the only thing you do, you forget about all your long-term plans, you forget about your destination where you're going to. All you have to do is make sure that you get the water out and fix the leak, because otherwise you're not going to go any further. So there's a crisis phase. And there, at that phase, as a leader, you've really short-term focus. And then after that, you can start looking at recovery. Then you can look at saying, oh, you know what, the boat's stable now. We might still be in the storm. So we've still got to navigate our way out of the storm. We're still not making very, very long-term plans because we're still not at the stage where we can set sail again to our destination, but at least we're over that crisis. So we're in that recovery stage. And then the last stage is the growth stage, where you say, okay, now we're ready. Now we're moving into the future. And I think at each of those stages, leaders have to do something differently. And for many people and for many leaders, they haven't had to deal with a crisis like that. It's not true for everybody. So I work with a lot of industries. So financial planners in Australia, like every year, there's some new regulations about how they need to operate. So they have to change every year. Aged care. Again, it's not just demographic changes, which they can predict, as you said. You can predict that we're going to have an aging population. They're going to need more residential care. They're going to need more healthcare. So you can predict that. But in a country like Australia, almost every year, the government says we need to change the aged care system. So they're just scrambling. Things have to change. So they go through this crisis. It's just that everyone now has been through a major crisis, which was COVID, and we're going to continue to have crises in the future. So the first thing is understand where you are. Are you at crisis? Are you at recovery? Are you at growth? And the trick is, it's not just for your business, your organization. It's sometimes for the whole industry, sometimes for the whole country, and actually sometimes even for individuals. So everybody had a different boat in that storm, right down to an individual level. There's some people who maybe they still had a job, but their partner or somebody in their family was sick or they lost their job. So a lot of leaders had to deal with that crisis for the first time ever. So I think the first thing you can do is understand where you are with each of your people, crisis, recovery, or growth, and then look at where you go from there.
So there is a popular, meme as well, right? That never let a crisis go for waste, which means that in a crisis moment, that's probably also one of the opportunities of a lifetime, because you can leapfrog your competition. So how does that kind of figure in your model as well?
Yeah, exactly right. You're exactly right, Mukesh. And this is one of the things that, so some organizations, they chose. So what most organizations did was they said, here's a crisis. Then we need to get out of the crisis, go to recovery, and then grow. Some people fast tracked that. And they said, there's a fourth stage to this, which is disruption. And some organizations disrupted themselves, and some came in and said, the rest of the world is in crisis. Let's see how we can disrupt that. Because what happens in a crisis is that everybody starts to, once they're through the worst of the crisis, they start to reassess, reevaluate, they just start looking at their priorities again. Some of their life priorities, some of their work priorities. You mentioned some of these earlier, Mukesh. People deciding whether they're going to spend more time working from home. Maybe they're going to work in a 4-day work week or a 3-day work week, or bring forward their retirement. And they look at their expenses because inflation and high rising costs mean that they need to start considering these things. So when everything's going really smoothly, people say, oh, I'm pretty happy with what I've got. I'm not necessarily going to look around at the competition. I'm not going to look for better options. But when there's a crisis, they start reevaluating all of that. And then that's when the smart, savvy disruptors come in and they say, look, we've got something better to offer you. And it's actually, in some ways, it's easier to disrupt in a crisis. Companies like Uber. So Uber was launched during the GFC, during the global financial crisis. And in some ways, it's easier for a company like Uber to disrupt then because people are looking for alternatives. So absolutely. So you say never let a good crisis go to waste. And not everyone can do that. Not everybody wants to do it, but it does create opportunities. And I often say to my clients, the leaders I work with, even if your business and your industry didn't have to go through a crisis, through COVID or through other disruptions, just be aware, because your customers might now be looking at alternatives. And this is where other little small, savvy, startup, agile companies are coming in and offering your customers something different. And they might be ready to take that.